Welcome, traveler. Settle into your bed. Let your eyes soften. And allow your breath to slow, just like the start of this story. Tonight we begin a journey. Not one of speed or urgency, but of gentle discovery. We begin not in the mountains of Peru, but on the eastern coast of the United States, in a quiet study filled with maps, journals, and dreams of the past. This is the story of Hiram Bingham, a curious man, a quiet historian, who would one day walk among the clouds and brush the moss from ancient stones. But before that he had to leave everything. It was spring in New Haven, Connecticut, 1911. The ivy was just beginning to stretch its green arms across the walls of Yale University. In a corner office of the history department, lit by the sleepy morning sun, a man in his mid-30s adjusted the edge of a rolled-up map. That man was Hiram. His fingers, ink-stained and methodical, pressed the parchment flat. It was a copy of an old Spanish account, one that whispered about a city in the Andes that no one had truly found again. A city built by the Inca, hidden away, forgotten by the world, but perhaps not by time. Hiram was not an adventurer in the traditional sense. He wasn't seeking gold or fame. He was a professor. He liked old things and quiet libraries. He believed that the past, if listened to gently, still had something to say. But something inside him stirred, some feeling he couldn't name. He didn't want to conquer. He simply wanted to see. So he closed the map with care, slipped it into a leather satchel with a few worn journals, and lit a small lamp even though it was morning. Old habits, he thought with a smile. In those days, traveling to South America was not a matter of hours or even days. It took time. Real time. Time you could feel in your bones. Hiram booked passage on a steamer headed first to Panama, then on to Lima, Peru, a journey of weeks by ship. He didn't rush to the port. He packed slowly. A few pairs of linen trousers, notebooks, pencils, a pair of sturdy boots, the soft wool hat. And late one evening, he walked through the lamplit streets of New Haven. For what might have been the 100th time, only this time with goodbye in his steps. He passed quiet homes with glowing windows. A bakery shuttered for the night. A horse-drawn cart rattling in the distance. The world didn't know he was leaving, but it didn't need to, because the journey wasn't about what others thought. It was about what he needed to feel. The port of New York City bustled the next morning. Longshoremen shouted. Seagulls called overhead. Steam hissed as the great ship prepared to leave. But Hiram wasn't nervous. He stood near the railing, one hand on the wood, eyes watching the water. It was gray and calm, rippling like silk in slow motion. He felt something ease inside him. The city would shrink behind him and the future would approach slowly, wave by wave. And that was fine. He didn't want to get there quickly. He wanted to get there thoughtfully. The sea days blended gently. The ship rolled with the rhythm of tides. And Hiram spent long hours on deck or in his cabin, reading old explorers' accounts. He liked the ones that described sounds, the call of birds in the mountains, the hush of wind across stone terraces. He imagined what those stones might look like now, tangled with vines, kissed by the morning mist. The Inca didn't build things to be flashy. They built them to last. He admired that. Every night he would write in his journal. Not grand plans, not goals, just thoughts. After days at sea, the ship docked at Panama, and Hiram stepped onto land again with slightly wobbly legs. The air was warm and thick with the scent of salt and flowers. It smelled different, full, alive. He stayed the night in a simple inn where frogs sang outside his window, and geckos darted across the walls like shadows made of glass. He fell asleep listening to the rain tapping gently on the roof, like nature whispering that he was getting closer. From Panama, the journey continued southward, along the Pacific coast of South America, until the port of Callao appeared on the horizon, just outside Lima. The ship groaned as it slowed to dock, and the gulls cried out in welcome or perhaps protest. It was July 1911, and the Peruvian winter had settled in quietly, cool air. Soft gray skies and mornings kissed with fog. Hiram stepped onto the cobbled streets of Lima, as if he were stepping into a dream someone else had written. The city felt like a painting in motion. Wooden balconies shaded old courtyards, and distant church bells rang with a slow, mellow tone. He found a small room in a quiet guest house near the old colonial quarter. It smelled of books, jasmine, and warm clay. Here the days passed gently. He visited libraries, spoke to aging archivists who had to blow dust from ancient volumes, listened more than he spoke, took notes with slow, thoughtful strokes. He walked through old plazas with trees that leaned like they were trying to listen. He sketched in the margins of his notebook, not just maps, but doorways, windows, clouds that seemed to hang in place. Each night, he would sit on a wooden bench beneath a tree that was older than any living memory. The stars above Lima were different than the ones in New Haven. They felt older, wiser, calmer. He would close his eyes and listen. To the breeze, to the past, to himself. And though he didn't yet know what he would find, he knew he was on the right path, not because it was clear, but because it was slow. And slow was exactly what he needed. Now as you lie here listening, perhaps you too are standing on the edge of something gentle and new. Not a discovery for the world, but a quiet moment just for you. There is no need to hurry. You don't have to climb a mountain tonight. You only have to breathe, like Hiram Bingham did so many years ago, looking out at the ocean and letting the past guide his feet. Tonight, may your breath become the tide. May your thoughts settle like dust in an old library. And may your sleep come softly. As the story continues, your journey continues. You're still surrounded by calm, by the quiet rhythm of an old path, one that stretches back through time. Take a slow, full breath. Let your muscles soften, and drift once more into the story. They called it La Ciudad de los Reyes, the City of Kings, Lima. A city built on the bones of two worlds, the world of the Spanish crown, and the deeper, older world of the Andes. When Hiram Bingham arrived in Lima in July of 1911, he stepped into a city quietly breathing between centuries. The roads were paved, yes, but they curved around ruins older than maps. Colonial balconies hung like wooden lace above streets where voices echoed, and evening lamps lit the stone like candlelight on parchment. The air was cool. Not sharp, not biting, just soft. As if the city had learned long ago not to raise its voice. Hiram walked everywhere. Not with purpose, but with curiosity. And not the kind of curiosity that rushes, but the kind that lingers. He wandered through the Plaza Mayor, where fountains whispered and pigeons cooed near polished benches. He watched shoeshine boys and flower sellers, heard the low murmur of a priest blessing someone in passing. And all the while he listened, because Lima didn't shout. It told its stories in layers, like quiet secrets meant only for those who slowed down. His first stop was the National Library. Housed in a building that smelled of parchment, salt air, and long memory. Inside, the ceilings were high. The windows let in filtered light that made the dust shimmer like stars. The librarian spoke in low tones, as though the books themselves were sleeping and not to be disturbed. Hiram approached an older man, Don Rodrigo, whose silver-rimmed glasses sat low on his nose, and whose fingers seemed permanently dusted with faded ink. Don Rodrigo did not ask what Hiram was looking for. Instead, he simply said, "You've come for the ones that mention Vilcabamba, haven't you?" Hiram smiled. This was not the first foreigner to arrive chasing the ghosts of the Inca. But most, Don Rodrigo said, were too loud, too fast. They didn't take time to read between the lines. The city you seek, Don Rodrigo murmured, was never truly lost, just left alone. And sometimes that's enough to make the world forget. For days Hiram returned to that library. He read letters written by Spanish soldiers. He studied old missionary reports. He copied fragments of maps drawn by candlelight centuries earlier. There was a name that came up again and again. Tampataco, Vilcabamba, Choqquequirao. Whispers of a final Incan refuge tucked deep in the Andes. One document, fragile as dry leaves, told of a royal estate built between sky and river, where the stones fit so perfectly they seemed carved by time itself. The city didn't have a name, only a feeling. High, it said. Sacred. Hidden. But libraries were not Hiram's only guide. He also listened to people, locals, shopkeepers, travelers, children. One afternoon, while sipping coca tea at a cafe shaded by old trees, he struck up a quiet conversation with a man named Senor Alvarez, a schoolteacher whose eyes sparkled when he spoke of the Andes. There are places, Alvarez said, where the mountains are so steep you think the earth is standing on tiptoe. And in those places there are stones, laid by hands that knew how to listen. Hiram asked what he meant by listen. Alvarez just smiled and tapped the side of his head. The Inca didn't force their buildings onto the land. They studied it first, felt the slope, listened to where the rain liked to run. Then they built. It wasn't just architecture. It was a conversation with the earth. In the evenings, Hiram walked along the Rimac River, its waters low and clear in the winter months. Children played near the banks, skipping stones. Street musicians filled the air with soft guitar and the heartbeat rhythm of cajon drums. Hiram didn't speak much. He took notes, not just words, but sounds. How the river curved. How the sun dipped behind the hills in slow motion. How the Spanish and Quechua languages sometimes intertwined in the marketplace like threads in a tapestry. His nights were still. His room had a wooden ceiling fan that turned with a soft whir, and a window that opened to a courtyard full of birds and hibiscus. Each night he would light a small lantern, sit at the desk, and write longhand in his journal. Lima is a place of layers, he wrote one night. Spanish rooftops and Incan roots, dust and silver. A hush that comes not from absence, but from age. He was falling under its spell. Not the spell of grandeur or spectacle, but of subtlety, of time unfolding, petal by petal. It was near the end of his second week in Lima that Hiram received a telegram. A fellow academic, Professor Uhel, had sent word from Cuzco. He had found new clues, stone steps hidden beneath moss, and a boy who claimed to have seen a place above the clouds. The message was simple. Come soon. Bring notebooks. Bring boots. And so Hiram packed his bag again. Not hurriedly, but carefully, because this was not the end of something. It was only the next ripple in a long, quiet current. He boarded the train to Cuzco just after dawn. It was a small locomotive, painted in worn greens and browns, its windows streaked with dew and dust. The whistle blew, not sharp but soft, and the train began to move, slow and steady, clicking toward the mountains. Out the window the world changed. Flat coastlands gave way to hills. Hills grew into valleys. And in the far distance, where the sky seemed to rest on the earth, the Andes waited. Hiram leaned back in his seat. He closed his eyes. The train rocked gently, like a lullaby for grown men who still believed in old cities and silent stones. Soft, sleepy music begins to return. Now, as you lie in the quiet, perhaps you too can hear the gentle hum of that train, carrying you away from noise, and towards something old and waiting. You don't need to rush. Just rest. Just listen. The city of kings lies behind you now, and the sacred mountains ahead. May your dreams take you somewhere high and peaceful tonight, where the past still whispers, and the stones remember. Let your body relax. Let the worries of the day drift away like mountain mist, and allow your breath to match the gentle rhythm of this story. Tonight, we continue through valleys carved by time, through mountain passes that carry whispers, and along trails once walked by emperors, farmers, and kings. You're not alone. You're traveling with memory, and memory walks slowly. The train to Cuzco moved like a lullaby, not fast, not urgent, just steady. Through the glass, Hiram saw the world begin to rise. The land lifted itself gently, green hills turning to rugged slopes, and then to jagged ridgelines that pierced the clouds like the edges of forgotten temples. He passed fields dotted with llamas, quiet towns with terracotta roofs, and women in bright shawls weaving in doorways, their fingers moving with centuries of knowledge. He scribbled notes as the train curved deeper inland. "The air is changing," he wrote, "thinner but cleaner. The sky seems closer here and the earth more ancient." He arrived in Cusco late in the afternoon. The sun was beginning to lower, painting the stone streets gold. Cusco, the old capital of the Inca. Once, it had been the center of an empire that stretched across mountains, deserts, and jungles. Its name meant the navel of the world. Now it was a city of layers. Spanish cathedrals built on Inca foundations. Markets that sold radios beside handmade sandals. Stone walls with no mortar, fit so tightly they had resisted earthquakes for centuries. Hiram walked those streets slowly, his boots tapping softly on the cobbles. He paused at every carved stone, ran his fingers over the rough grooves that once guided water or light. And he listened, because here the past wasn't dead. It was folded into the present like a thread in a tapestry. That night he stayed in a small adobe guest house. It was quiet. There were no electric lights, just a flickering oil lamp and the crackle of a fire in the hearth. Through the open window, he heard distant flutes and drums, the music of a festival drifting up from the plaza. He didn't go down. He just lay on the bed, arms folded behind his head, and let the music carry him to sleep. The next morning he met Professor Yuhel at a cafe just beyond the plaza. Yuhel was older, with sun-weathered skin and sharp, tired eyes. He spoke little, but when he did, every word felt carefully chosen, like placing a stone in the perfect spot. "The sacred valley," Yuhel said, sipping strong coffee, "still holds more than we know. There are ruins the locals pass every day without noticing, and some they protect quietly. Not because they don't care, but because they do." He handed Hiram a folded page. A hand-drawn sketch made by a boy in a village north of Cusco. It showed terraces, steps, a river and, at the top, a collection of blocky shapes. A citadel. Hidden. "He called it Machu Picchu," Yuhel said softly. "Old peak. But no one has mapped it. Not yet." 2 days later, Hiram left Cusco on horseback. His guide was a man named Melchor Artiega, a Quechua farmer with eyes that seemed to recognize every stone along the path. They rode slowly. The trail into the sacred valley wasn't easy. It wound through canyons and crossed streams, climbed slopes so steep the horses had to stop and breathe with heavy chests. But the silence was beautiful. Birdsong echoed through the cliffs. The wind rustled fields of corn and quinoa. And at night, the stars were so bright they seemed to hum above the earth. They passed through villages where time moved differently. Children played with carved wooden toys. Women washed clothes in rivers that had run the same route since long before the Spanish arrived. And elders sat in circles, chewing coca leaves and speaking in the soft tones of Quechua. Hiram didn't understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. These people didn't think of themselves as descendants of the Inca. They were simply continuing, not recreating history, just carrying it forward quietly. They reached the town of Ollantaytambo by the 4th day. It was a place of power. An Inca fortress built into the mountainside, its terraces rising like stairs to the sky. Stonework so precise it felt alive. Hiram wandered alone among the walls, his hand tracing the cool surface of the granite. This, he whispered to himself, was not built for kings. It was built for the gods. He imagined the sound of drums echoing between the cliffs, the sun cresting the peaks at solstice. The priests raising their eyes to Inti, the sun god, with a kind of reverence lost to the modern world. At dawn they continued deeper into the valley. Now the trail narrowed. There were no roads, only footpaths carved by centuries of use. Stone steps buried under moss. Wooden bridges swinging gently over rivers below. They rode less and walked more. Every so often Hiram would stop, kneel down and brush away vines or soil, looking, listening, hoping. They were following the Urubamba River, its waters tumbling beside them like a voice urging them forward. And then one evening, as the clouds lowered like a blanket, Melcher pointed to a peak ahead, sharp, proud, rising above the jungle. "There," he said simply, "that is Machu Picchu." Hiram said nothing. Not yet. He just looked and smiled. They camped near the base of the mountain that night. A simple fire, warm blankets, the stars peeking through gaps in the mist. Hiram wrote by firelight, the ink running a little from the damp air. "Tomorrow we climb, but tonight we wait and listen." The valley is sacred not because of what's hidden in it, but because it doesn't rush. It asks you to slow down. And maybe that's where the real discovery lies. Now, traveler, your own trail winds gently forward. You don't have to climb tonight. You don't have to search. Just rest. Let the sound of the river carry your thoughts. Let the stars of the sacred valley watch over you. You are on your way, just as Hiram was, quietly, patiently, step by step. The fire has burned low. The stars have wheeled silently overhead. And now, with the first gentle light of morning, you open your eyes. Today, something ancient waits just beyond the mist. But you don't need to rush. You are safe. You are still. And your journey continues. The night before had been cold. The kind of cold that doesn't bite, but wraps itself around you like a damp wool blanket. Above the treetops, the jagged peaks stood like stone sentinels, watching in silence as the fire flickered in the small camp below. Hiram Bingham had barely slept, not from discomfort, but from quiet excitement. He had dreamed, not of gold or treasure or glory, but of doorways hidden by vines, and footsteps echoing in places no map had ever marked. Now, as the sky began to lighten behind the mountains, he wrapped his journal in oilcloth, pulled on his boots, and joined Melcher Artiega by the river's edge. Today they would climb. The path was steep. It wasn't really a trail, more a series of worn steps, carved hundreds of years before, now softened by moss, and half swallowed by the jungle. They moved slowly, not because they were unsure, but because it felt wrong to rush. The trees whispered overhead. Birdsong rose and fell in gentle waves. And every so often, a butterfly would drift past, its wings flashing with the blues and oranges of forgotten gods. As they climbed, Hiram's thoughts grew quiet. This was not the roar of discovery. This was the hush before it. About an hour into the climb, they met a boy, barefoot, no more than 12, holding a small wooden flute. He smiled, pointed uphill, and said just 2 words in Quechua. "Ali esta." There it is. He turned and without waiting began walking ahead, his small figure weaving through the brush like someone who had always known the way. Hiram followed. The boy's name, he later learned, was Pablito. He and his family lived on the mountain, farming terraces so steep you had to bend your knees just to stand upright. They knew of the ruins, but to them they weren't ruins. They were just part of the world. Just old stones where their goats sometimes wandered. The trees began to thin. The air grew cooler. And suddenly, like a curtain lifting, the jungle opened. And there it was. A city. But not like any city you've ever seen. Not loud. Not crowded. Silent. Almost shy, like it had been hiding, waiting patiently for someone to find it without shouting. Terraces carved into the side of the mountain like green steps to the sky. Walls of gray stone so perfectly placed, you could not slip a single blade of grass between the blocks. And beyond them, a plaza, a temple, a sundial, the skeleton of a world still holding its breath. Hiram stood motionless, not for a moment, but for several minutes. The clouds drifted around the peaks above like slow-moving ships. Condors circled in the distance. And somewhere far below, the Urubamba River whispered its song of stone and time. "This," he wrote later, "is the most beautiful place I have ever seen." The boy led him through narrow paths between the structures. There were no signs, no fences, no sounds but the soft crunch of earth beneath their feet. They passed small rooms with trapezoidal doorways, a shape used by the Inca to resist earthquakes. They passed ceremonial baths, where water still flowed in thin, crystal streams down ancient channels. And they climbed higher still, to a platform where the stone curved into a semicircle, the Temple of the Sun. Here light would have struck the altar at just the right angle during the solstice. Here priests would have stood in silence, watching the stars turn like a giant calendar in the sky. And now, it was only birdsong, and wind, and the slow heartbeat of the mountain. There was no gold, no jewels, but that didn't matter. The real treasure was in the stillness, in the knowledge that something had lasted, not because it had fought time, but because it had lived gently within it. Hiram walked the site for hours. He took notes, drew sketches, asked Pablito and his family about the names they used. Some buildings had no names at all. They were just the place where the stone warms at noon, or the wall that hums when it rains. Isn't that how all sacred things begin? With simple names, spoken quietly by those who live closest to the earth? By the end of the day, Hiram sat alone on a flat stone near the edge of a terrace. Below him, the green steps flowed downward like waves. Above him, clouds curled around the peaks. He took out his journal, and in slow, deliberate script he wrote, "I believe I have found the final refuge of the Inca. Not Vilcabamba perhaps, but something purer, something untouched. A city that knew how to disappear, not in fear but in wisdom." Then he closed the book, and simply sat, listening, watching, just being. That night, back at the camp, he lay in his bedroll beneath the open sky. No tent, no roof, just stars. Endless, shimmering stars, spread across the heavens like silver dust. He thought of the people who had lived up here, who had built without metal tools, without wheels, without written words, and yet who had shaped stone so gracefully, you might think it had grown that way. He imagined a young Incan girl climbing the same steps, stopping to adjust the stone at the top of a terrace, not for anyone to see, but because it wasn't right, because it mattered. Now, traveler, you've seen the hidden city too. You've walked its mossy paths, felt its quiet pulse, and understood that not all discoveries are loud. Some are found in stillness, some in silence, just like rest, just like peace. So as your breath deepens, and your mind settles, remember that the greatest treasures are often those that ask you to simply slow down and see. You've come so far, and now the world around you has grown still again. Just the breath of the mountain, the hush of ancient leaves, and the soft pulse of time beneath your feet. Let your shoulders sink a little deeper into your bed. Let your breath become soft and steady, and together we'll return to the hidden city, where stone remembers, and silence speaks. The morning after his discovery, Hiram Bingham rose before the sun. The sky was still indigo, and the mist coiled low along the stone terraces. The mountaintop city was cloaked in silence as if it were waiting. He walked barefoot now, not out of necessity but out of respect. The stones beneath him were smooth with time, each one shaped, lifted, and placed by hands that had long since returned to the earth. It wasn't just a ruin, it was a memory made solid. He wandered toward a low wall along the eastern side of the citadel. Here the first light of day would fall, and as the mist began to thin, the stone beneath his hand grew warm. That's when he heard it. A sound, so faint it could have been imagination. Not speech, not music, just a single, subtle vibration, like a voice humming through stone. He knelt down, pressing his ear to the rock, and for a moment he swore he felt the city breathing. He began to notice something strange. The architecture of Machu Picchu wasn't just beautiful, it was thoughtful. The trapezoidal windows weren't just designed for earthquakes. They framed the rising sun. The narrow channels didn't just move rainwater away. They guided it like sacred veins through the city. Even the terraces served more than one purpose. Farming, yes, but also temperature regulation. And perhaps acoustics. When he stood in the center of the plaza and clapped once, the echo that returned didn't sound like the same clap. It was warped, rounded, as if the city had responded in its own voice. It was alive in ways modern cities had forgotten how to be. He followed the sound to the Temple of the Three Windows. It stood on a raised platform overlooking the valley, its three openings gazing out at the sacred mountains like wide, ancient eyes. Through them, the light filtered like liquid gold, and the wind moved through like breath. He sat quietly in the corner of the room, his notebook closed beside him. There was nothing to write. Some places speak not in words, but in presence. Later, one of the local farmers, an old man named Teofilo, climbed up with his son to visit the ruins. They brought fresh fruit and 2 carved gourds for water. Teofilo had lived at the base of the mountain his whole life, and he had his own names for each corner of the city. "That stone there," he said, pointing to a smooth slab near the central plaza. "We call it the heartbeat. Tap it in the right place, and the ground answers." Hiram tried it, gently knocking twice with his knuckles. And sure enough, beneath the soles of his feet, he felt a faint vibration, like the echo of a drum buried far below. "It's how we knew the city was never fully empty," Teofilo said with a smile. "It sleeps, yes, but it listens." For the next few days, Hiram and the few villagers who knew the place worked slowly, gently clearing vines, brushing soil off stones, and measuring walls. There was no rush, no loud voices, just soft footfalls and the occasional whistle of a bird. Each day brought new discoveries. A carved staircase that led nowhere, or perhaps had once led somewhere, before the jungle had claimed it back. A ritual stone shaped like a compass, its corners aligned perfectly with the cardinal directions. And once, near the edge of the city, they found a chamber with walls so finely carved, you could see your reflection in the stone. "A mirror," Hiram whispered, "but not of glass, a mirror of time." He began to dream differently. Each night as he lay beneath the stars, his sleep was deeper. He dreamed not of cities and discoveries, but of water flowing endlessly down mountains, of stars dancing above silent plazas, and of people weaving cloth in rhythms that matched the turning of the seasons. He no longer dreamed of conquering the city. He dreamed of joining it. One morning, before the sun had touched the ruins, he climbed to the very highest point, Machu Picchu, the steep peak that rises behind the city like a guardian. The path was narrow and treacherous, but at the summit the world opened. Below him, Machu Picchu curled like a sleeping serpent. Green, silent, perfect. And in that moment he felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but humility. He understood that he hadn't found the city. He had been allowed to see it. That night, he sat with Pablito and Teofilo around a small fire. They passed roasted maize and warm coca tea. The wind rustled through the grass, and the mountains shimmered in the moonlight. "Why do you think it was abandoned?" Hiram asked gently. Teofilo thought for a moment, then said, Maybe it wasn't. Maybe they just walked away when they were ready, when they knew the stones could speak for them. Hiram smiled. That idea comforted him more than any theory. That the people of Machu Picchu didn't vanish in fear, but chose to leave in peace. Now, as you lie back and feel the weight of the day fall away, remember that not all echoes are loud. Some are soft. Some are gentle. Some live in stone, in silence, and in sleep. Let your thoughts settle like dust on ancient terraces. Let your breath flow like water down the channels of the mountain. And let yourself be still, knowing that you too carry echoes, memories, stories, dreams, that will someday whisper softly to someone else. The city is quiet now, and so are you. You've been walking soft paths through ancient cities, listening to stones speak, and now it's time to follow the sound of water. Let your breathing slow. Let the weight of today dissolve like mist over the mountains, and together we'll drift gently down the river of time. Beneath Machu Picchu, a river flows. You've heard its voice already, soft, steady, never-ending. The Urubamba River. To the Inca, it was more than water. It was sacred, a mirror to the Milky Way, a silver ribbon that tied earth to sky. And like all rivers, it carried stories. As Hiram Bingham stood above the cliffs, looking down at the winding Urubamba, he didn't just see a river. He saw a path that connected the valleys to the mountains, fields to forests, past to present. He learned that long before Spanish boots had touched the highlands, this river had been followed by messengers of the Inca, chasquis they were called. Fleet-footed, trained from childhood, they ran with messages, food, and ceremonial items, bounding along trails that wound through dizzying heights. They didn't carry scrolls. They carried memory, knots tied in cords called quipus, a woven language only the trained could read, and through them the empire breathed. As Hiram followed the river down one morning, guided by a quiet farmer named Mateo, he began to see traces of the old road, not paved, but built, with care, with geometry, with purpose. Flat stones, guard walls, occasional steps that turned the climb into rhythm, and every few miles, a tambos, a resting post, where chasquis could eat, drink, and trade stories with one another. Even in the deepest forests, you could find them, silent, mossy, but still standing. Time had worn them, but not erased them. Mateo was quiet, but his eyes spoke. He stopped sometimes without explanation, pointing to a single stone shaped like a llama, or a carving barely visible beneath lichen. Hiram didn't ask too many questions anymore. He had learned to listen with his eyes, and feel answers in the soles of his feet. At a bend in the river they came to a rock face, smooth, dark, cool to the touch. Here, etched in low relief, was a figure with outstretched arms and a sun for a face. "That's Inti, the Sun Father," Mateo whispered. "He watches the river and the trail." The Inca didn't worship with temples alone. The world was the temple. The river was a holy vein. The peaks were sacred ancestors. The wind carried messages. The stones, even in silence, were considered alive. This wasn't superstition. It was connection. Everything was woven together. That night, back in a small shelter built near the water's edge, Hiram sat outside, his journal resting in his lap. He didn't write at first. Instead, he watched the river move beneath the moonlight, smooth, endless, unbothered by the centuries that had tried to tame it. He realized something then. The people of Machu Picchu had not built against nature. They had built with it. The city didn't sit on the mountain. It grew from it. The terraces weren't scars on the land. They were steps toward the sky. And the river? The river had always been the thread that tied everything together. When he finally opened his journal, he wrote only one line. The Inca didn't conquer the mountain. They listened to it. A few days later, they followed the river deeper into the sacred valley. The trail wound past villages, some modern, some ancient, where children played on the same steps their ancestors once carved. In one village, Alante Tambo, the stones rose like stories stacked one on top of another. Some were smooth, Inca. Others were rough, Spanish. And still others were jagged, hastily added in times of resistance. Here the past had not been hidden. It had survived. They met a woman named Aurelia, who kept a small garden by the edge of a canal. The water that flowed past her herbs was fed by an Inca aqueduct, still functional, still flowing. Hundreds of years after it was first carved. "It's the mountain's gift," she said, pouring a cup of warm tea into a gourd for Hiram. "You just have to guide it, not fight it." He sipped the tea, spiced with muna and coca leaf. It was warm, earthy, and unfamiliar, but comforting, like everything here. He began to understand that Machu Picchu wasn't a mystery to be solved. It was a conversation, one that asked you to sit quietly, to watch, to feel. Each stone had a voice, each path a memory, not just of kings or priests, but of children who ran barefoot on the terraces, of farmers who whispered to their crops, of potters who shaped clay while the wind sang through the canyons. The river carried these stories, not in words, but in sound, in rhythm, in the slow language of water shaping stone. It had no beginning, no end, only flow, just like time, just like dreams, just like rest. Now, as your eyes grow heavier, and your thoughts soften like evening mist on the river, know that you too are carried by a current, not rushed, not lost, but gently guided, by breath, by memory, by peace. You are not alone. You are part of the thread, woven through time, cradled by the earth, and held by the soundless song of the stones and stars. Let sleep find you, like a river returning to the sea. High in the Andes, where the clouds sometimes kiss the earth and the mountains hold their breath, there once lived a people whose days followed the rhythm of the sun and stars. Nestled among emerald terraces and sacred peaks was a city known as Machu Picchu, a quiet jewel perched on the spine of the world. We don't know everything about the lives of the Inca who once called this place home. But if we close our eyes and breathe slowly, the echoes of their days begin to return. Not as loud stories but as whispers, gentle, peaceful, and full of wonder. Let's go there now in our minds. Let's drift backward through time to when the stones were new and the sky just as endless. The morning arrives quietly, before the sun has fully climbed over the peaks. A pale silver light begins to spill across the stone steps and narrow paths. Mist curls low around the hills, softening the sharp edges of the city. There's a stillness in the air, like the whole world is holding its breath. Inside a simple stone house with a thatched roof, a family begins to stir. A woman wrapped in a woven shawl stirs warm maize porridge in a clay pot over a glowing hearth. Its smell, earthy and comforting, fills the room. Her youngest child blinks sleepily, still curled on a bed of llama wool. Outside, the soft bleating of a young alpaca greets the day. Her husband is already awake, his silhouette framed against the morning mist as he tends to the crops. He kneels among neat rows of potatoes, brushing dew from green leaves. Each plant is a small miracle. The mountain soil is tough, but with care and patience, it gives back. The terraces ripple down the slopes like giant stairways, carved into the hillside by countless hands. From above they look like art. But for the Inca they were life, an engineering wonder that turned stone and slope into rich fields. And every morning, someone like him greeted the day in that quiet rhythm. Bending, planting, whispering thanks to the earth. Up on a nearby rise, a young apprentice hurries to join his teacher. They walk together to the sacred Intihuatana, a carved pillar of stone that reaches skyward like a question. The teacher is an astronomer, patient and wise, his face lined by years of sun and study. He watches the boy's footsteps carefully. "This stone," he says softly, "holds the sun in place. It helps us understand the seasons. It tells us when to plant and when to harvest. The stars speak, but we must learn to listen. Together they sit in silence, watching the sunlight shift across the stone. The boy doesn't fully understand yet, but he listens. And that is enough. In the heart of the city, women gather in a shaded courtyard. Their hands are busy weaving, the strands of alpaca wool dancing between their fingers. Their cloth is bright with the colors of the highlands, deep reds, golden yellows, ocean blues. As they work, they speak in hushed tones. Not gossip but memory. They remember the names of their ancestors, the shape of dreams, the way a hummingbird hovered near the river yesterday. A little girl watches them, wide-eyed. One of the women smiles and pats the spot beside her. The child sits down, and together they begin to braid a new thread. Farther down the path, two boys chase a rolling gourd, their laughter bouncing off the stone walls. Their game is simple, just running and kicking, but their joy is endless. They dart between the houses, leap over steps, tumble into piles of dried corn husks. Their grandfather watches from a doorway, smiling. He holds a carved flute in his hands. When the boys grow tired, he'll call them over and play a song. Something slow and soft. Something passed down to him when he was a boy, chasing gourds through the same narrow alleys. He's seen many seasons in Machu Picchu. He knows which winds bring rain. He knows the names of the stars, even the ones that barely shine. And he knows that life moves in circles. Planting, growing, harvesting. Resting. As midday arrives, the city hums gently. People move like water, never rushed, never still. A man carries bundles of herbs up the steep paths. A young woman feeds guinea pigs in their warm little corner. A group of children listen to a story about a condor that flew all the way to the moon. There's no shouting, no hurry. Even the animals seem at peace. The llamas graze lazily, their long necks bobbing with every step. A hawk circles overhead, watching with calm eyes. In a cool stone building that overlooks the valley, elders gather for quiet conversation. One of them speaks of a dream where the river flowed backward. Another remembers a time when the sky turned orange and it rained for 7 days. They aren't trying to explain or solve anything. They're just sharing, remembering, letting time pass like a gentle breeze. As the sun begins its slow descent, the shadows stretch longer across the terraces. A hush returns to the city, not from fear or sadness but from contentment. The day has been full. Now it is time to let it settle. Evening meals are simple: roasted tubers, fresh herbs, a warm drink made from leaves. Families gather around the hearth. The fire crackles softly. Outside, the last of the light paints the mountains in gold. The stars begin to appear. First a few, then hundreds, then thousands. The sky becomes a blanket of silver dots. The Milky Way arcs overhead, bright and bold. The Inca call it Mayu, the celestial river. It flows across the heavens just as the Urubamba River winds below. To them, the sky is not a place far away. It is part of their world, just higher. The stars are not strangers, they are guides, relatives. Stories in the sky. In a quiet courtyard, the astronomer sits again beside the Intihuatana. He looks at the stars, but not for answers, just to feel close to them. The apprentice lies nearby, already half asleep, his head resting on folded arms. Tomorrow, the teacher whispers, we'll learn about the sun's path through the mountain gate. But tonight, just listen. And so they do. They listen to the night wind brushing over stone. To the soft murmur of the river below. To the distant hoot of an owl. To the sound of the earth sleeping. Somewhere near the edge of the city, the grandfather begins to play his flute. The melody is slow, curling into the air like smoke. It's not a song with words. It's a memory. A lullaby. A way of saying, you are here, you are safe, you are part of something bigger. As the notes drift through the night, the city listens. Not just the people, but the stones, the trees, the mountains. Everything holds still. Everything remembers. And now, as you lie in your bed, eyes growing heavy, heart slowing its rhythm, you can still feel that place, that city of peace. That cradle of stars and stone. Machu Picchu is quiet now, wrapped in the arms of the Andes, but its echoes remain, in dreams, in imagination, in the soft breath of the night. The mountains were quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that doesn't just fill the air, it fills you. Hiram Bingham stood at the edge of the path one last time, The sun behind him, Machu Picchu in front. He didn't move right away. He just breathed. Everything he had seen, everything he had felt, it lived in him now. The winding terraces, the stones worn smooth by centuries of silent feet, the whisper of the wind through ancient windows. The high city had changed him, not with noise or shock, but with stillness. And now it was time to go. His pack was lighter than when he arrived. He had eaten much of his food, used many of his notes. But still it felt heavier. Not from weight, but from meaning. Inside were sketches, half-written journal pages, pressed flowers from the slopes, and one smooth stone from the path where he liked to sit. He didn't know why he took the stone, only that it felt right. Round, cold in the morning, warm by midday. Something small to hold when he needed to remember. The villagers had already begun their day. Far below, someone was laughing. A dog barked. Smoke curled from a cooking fire. And above it all, Machu Picchu stood still, just as it had before him and just as it would after. As he walked down from the high ridge, he didn't rush. His steps were slow, deliberate. He wasn't climbing anymore. He wasn't searching. He was simply returning. The trail curved gently through the cloud forest, thick with orchids and vines. Birds called from the canopy, their songs echoing through the leaves like little bells. Sometimes he would pause to listen. Not to identify them, but just to hear. Just to be there. A butterfly followed him for a while, flitting just ahead like a guide. It would land on a rock, wait for him to pass, then flutter on. Bright blue wings against the green world. A small, living reminder that not all beauty demands attention. Midway down, Bingham reached a place he had often stopped during the climb up. A small outcrop, nothing grand, but it offered a view across the valley, a view he once stared at with eager eyes, impatient to reach the top. But now the view meant something else. He sat on a fallen log, took off his hat, let the breeze brush through his hair. The sound of the river far below rose like a lullaby. He could almost hear the city behind him, though it was hidden now by the trees. And as he sat, he thought of the people who had lived there. Not as artifacts or puzzle pieces, but as human beings. He pictured a woman grinding maize early in the morning, her child curled nearby in a woven blanket. He imagined a farmer tending terraces carved into impossible slopes, his hands rough from seasons past. He saw a boy climbing the steps two at a time, laughing with a friend. A stargazer standing quietly at night, watching for signs from above. They were gone. But they had been real. And somehow he had felt them. The journey down took hours, but he didn't mark the time. There was no schedule now, no task to check off. Only the motion of returning. By late afternoon, the forest thinned, and the path widened into softer earth. The valley opened before him, warm and golden. Villagers passed him on donkeys, carrying baskets and bundles. They greeted him with nods, sometimes a smile. He returned each one quietly. He no longer felt like an explorer or a stranger. Just a man who had seen something sacred and carried it with him. He crossed a shallow stream. The water was clear and cold. He stepped carefully, watching the current play over stones. A few children splashed nearby, laughing. He paused to watch them. One of the children waved. Bingham smiled and waved back. As twilight settled, he reached the place where he would rest for the night, a small shelter near the base of the mountain. A woman brought him soup, warm and simple. He ate slowly, tasting every bit of it. And as the stars came out, he sat alone outside the hut, staring up at the dark ridge above. He couldn't see Machu Picchu anymore. But he didn't need to. It was inside him now. He thought about how rushed he had been on the way there. Eager, impatient, focused on maps, measurements, notes. But now all of that had faded. What remained was a quiet feeling in his chest, like still water, like morning mist, He didn't know what he would write yet. He didn't know how the world would receive his discovery. But that didn't matter tonight. Tonight was not for writing. Tonight was for remembering. He laid down his pack, removed the smooth stone, held it in his palm for a while, then placed it beside him. Then he lay back, the earth beneath him, the sky above, and in the stillness he found something he hadn't even known he was seeking. Not fame, not answers, not proof, but peace. As you lie in your own bed now, quiet and still, imagine that high place where the clouds drift like dreams, where old stones hold memories, where the wind knows your name. You don't need to climb a mountain to find it. It lives in you. A place of stillness, a place of return, a place where you can simply be. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften. Let the weight of the day melt away like mist in morning sun. Close your eyes. You have arrived. You are home.